What's up, dudes? Max here. So a little while ago, back when Mai was first playable at a Capcom event, another game was playable, which was Capcom Fighting Collection 2. We recently got some more information on this. It's going to be out not too long from now, within a few months. And one of the bigger questions, at least from me, was kind of the quality of each individual game. The good part is that we have a comparison to directly compare this to, which is the Marvel vs. Capcom collection. And the good news about that is the majority of games, or several of them in Capcom Fighting Collection 2, are running on kind of similar hardware and sort of like a pretense that the Marvel vs. Capcom collection was, because that game also had a Naomi-style game in it, which is the same thing for several titles in Capcom Fighting Collection 2, because, yeah, the majority of these things are Dreamcast games. That being said, you probably have a pretty good idea of what you'll be expecting, what's going to be in this collection, how you're going to engage with it. We already know the titles that are associated, but we only had the ability to have a preview event play Capcom vs. SNK 2, Project Justice, as well as Street Fighter Alpha 3 Upper, so those are the only ones I can give you direct impressions on. But like I said, if you played the previous Capcom Fighting Collections, we have no resemblance of how the netcode is going to be, but it's probably going to be pretty good based on the MVC collection. And one of the things that was absolutely apparent in that game for me was the quality of the actual play experience for each game. And I don't even mean like features and feature sets and unlockables. I mean, how does the game feel in comparison to what I remember from previous versions and how it works in the modern day? Like, how does it feel on a TV? And the great thing about Marvel vs. Capcom Collection is that, man, those games felt good. In fact, it wasn't just me that felt that way. The majority of the community of that collection was for Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and a lot of those folks that were competitive and have been playing that game for like 10 to 15 years on a variety of different platforms or whatever was the best, pretty much all jumped over to the MVC collection, which is a great thing to say about the quality of that play experience and how close it is to the actual original Dreamcast/arcade version of MVC 2. So, with that being said, of the 3 games that are playable in here, let's talk about the one that I personally put the most time into back in the day, which is Capcom vs. SNK 2.
Capcom vs. SNK 2, Mark of the Millennium, 2001.
All records are made to be broken.
For you guys that don't know, CVS2 for many people was kind of like the last Street Fighter game for a very long time. And I get it, you hear me say Capcom vs. SNK, it's clearly a game that is SNK and Capcom sort of put together. It literally takes the mechanics of all the games and stuffs them together. But at this time, Street Fighter was like a lot different. Street Fighter 3 Third Strike was the last really big Street Fighter game that was kind of holding on to the competitive scene. And Third Strike was pretty unique, as well as the Street Fighter 3 series of being like kind of un-Street Fighter in many ways. So a lot of folks that really liked the true sort of footsie nature of what Street Fighter kind of was, but obviously more mechanically dense, much faster, had a lot more sort of meat and bones to pick at, was CVS2. So many people look at this game as sort of being like the last bastion of like pinnacle 2D style gameplay and visuals for a Capcom Street Fighter game. So yeah, you know, I personally like Third Strike a little bit more, but man, CVS2 has just got so much to it. It's got like 6 different groove systems that completely change the mechanics of each game, and inside each one of those grooves, there's a whole bunch of other small, minuscule tech that'll greatly change the way you play the game. The biggest caveat of that is that it's a classic Capcom game, so it's tough. A lot of the inputs, a lot of the precision timing, one-frame links, like all that kind of stuff that you might have had issues with maybe in the Street Fighter 4 era are exacerbated in some of these old games. They can be kind of tough to do the super optimal stuff, but very easy to jump into because you can quickly see what's good about characters or what isn't good about them and come to some pretty quick conclusions. And I'll say personally, since I have a lot of experience with it, I own a CVS2 arcade cabinet, and I've played it on a variety of systems between PS2, Dreamcast, all back in the day when I attempted to play it competitively. This version's pretty great. And I specifically picked a lot of characters that have some fun links and chains and stuff just to see how it works, and man, I don't even feel like I was playing particularly on like amazing monitors with perfect setups. But on the PlayStation 5 version that we were playing, CVS2 felt absolutely wonderful. And even in some attempts where I was like not a roll canceling expert, roll canceling is a method that you can apply an invincibility of a roll to a special move, but you have to pretty much cancel that roll into a special move within the very first few frames of that special. And I felt like I was able to do it more consistently here than in any other situations like emulation or even way back in the day on some other versions. I think many people have played the PlayStation 3 version of this game, which is absolutely terrible. There's a PS3 port of the PS2 game, and man, it's just an input delay, absolute horrible trash fire, and it's always bugged me. So the Dreamcast version is kind of the one I always default to, and the PS2 version is also wonderful. This version feels great, man. And the options that are in there, you know, we're learning that we can have options for the EO version of the game. There's plenty of different things to sort of chomp into is wonderful. And I just very quickly flew through an arcade mode like it was nothing. I didn't get the final bosses because I wasn't focusing on killing everybody with supers. But yeah, CVS2 is an absolute wonderful game. And in this collection, it's pretty much the Marvel vs. Capcom 2 of Capcom Fighting Collection 2, where it's like, oh yeah, you know, all the other games in the NBC series just really make the first collection for NBC that much better. But man, the majority of folks here are here from Marvel vs. Capcom 2. That's kind of the case with Capcom Fighting Collection 2, and the good news is that we're going to be getting an experience that feels just as good as NBC 2 did in that one, which is a resounding positive for this entire thing. But that's not all. I also played a little bit of Street Fighter Alpha 3 Upper. This is the one game in this probably entire collection, maybe outside of like Plasma Sword, that I really don't have a lot of time with. And again, we only got CVS2, Alpha 3 Upper, and Project Justice in this collection to play at this preview event. And from what I did play, I know there has been historically issues with this version of the game. And even, you know, I think this was used as the base for the PSP version. I could be wrong with that. But the PSP version, which was Alpha 3 Upper Max, it had like a ton of different stuff and probably the most feature-rich version of Street Fighter Alpha 3 ever. That one also had quite a bit of input delay on the PSP from what I remember, and also in emulation whenever you try to play it, there can be some issues. The nice part is that without having a ton of A3 experience, I just jumped in and tried it and pressed some buttons and was going through arcade mode and just seeing how it goes, and it didn't feel too bad. I can't really speak directly because maybe it didn't feel as pristine and as precise as something like Capcom vs. SNK 2, but for those of you that are like looking forward to, oh man, did they really fix the input delay of Alpha 3 Upper, if you were one of like, you know, the few hundred people that would really notice that, I can't really say because I don't have the impressions of playing Alpha 3 Upper on like an arcade machine, but it felt all right. And it didn't feel that much different than Street Fighter Alpha 3, but it would be truly impressive if they were able to completely get rid of the input delay thing. Now, granted, this input delay, nobody else is going to notice this, dude. Like, nobody makes a note of Alpha 3 on PSP having a ton of input delay. People just love it because it's the most feature-rich version of the game with the most characters. And the nice part about Alpha 3 Upper Max is that, yeah, this version of the game is that, but it's the arcade version, so it doesn't have absolutely everything going into, like, the Yoon and the Yang, and, I'm sorry, the Yoon and the Eagles and the Makis and that kind of stuff. They didn't get everything from CVS2 sprites. But this is still going to be an Alpha 3 that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. And maybe not have the most feature-rich stuff in there. It is nice that it's here because it has not been ported to many things. The Saturn version, the Dreamcast version, like those stuff, they do not have like everything of this version, and Alpha 3 has been split into a lot of different versions over the years. So it's good that the true arcade port of Alpha 3 Upper is going to be finally on something. And last but not least is Project Justice. And Project Justice, another quote-unquote like Dreamcast game, is something that I think few people might not be familiar with in general. Rival Schools is sort of a quite niche Capcom thing that was reintroduced in the Street Fighter V era. And I think a lot of people resoundingly were looking at it with a pretty positive eye, where, yeah, this has always been a cool franchise. It's always been a cool series, and it's always been something that if you go back and show people Team Up Supers in Project Justice back on the Dreamcast, it's like, whoa, this game was crazy. But yes, it is a 3D Capcom fighter, not made by Eureka, which is important to note. There were a few Capcom fighting games that actually were made in-house at Capcom and were not like outsourced to Eureka, which did the Street Fighter EX series. So this is one of them. And the funny thing is, on this collection, but unplayable at this event, is also Plasma Sword, which is a part of the Star Gladiator series. And yes, that's another one that was made in-house at Capcom, which is a part of their big 3D era in the late 90s. But as far as me playing this, it felt pretty decent. I will say, as far as a little bit of criticism, it did feel like this title specifically may not have been as input precise, but these are getting into very minuscule, like, opinions and feelings, right? There's so many things between being a development build, anything we're playing is in development and is still being worked on and is not being finished. It did feel like this one may not have been as like input precise as some of the other ones, but was still 100% playable, looked absolutely fantastic, and ran beautifully. So what I love about it is that we get a lot of the original visuals with this stuff. Pretty much like the epitome of the 480p era Dreamcast visuals, but I think it will be disappointing for some that this stuff isn't properly upscaled. It is still being presented in its natural, I think, resolution that was the old arcade versions of the game. Still, for those of you that have never tried it, Project Justice is going to be a treat, man. If you've never been exposed to this series or have seen these characters or have checked out the interactions therein, so much is here to kind of discover and divulge into that you're going to have a ton of fun with how this game actually works. It's very cool, dude. But outside of that, yeah, all the other features that were present in this build of the game were mostly the same things that were in the MVC collection. I think almost the entirety of the screen display options, like filters, where you can put like CRT filters and stuff like that, were kind of the same thing. It didn't feel like there was that many differences from the previous collection, which was the MVC collection. So the good news is that, yes, like if you're looking forward to these games, the big resounding message from Capcom was that, okay, yeah, the input precision and making these feel as good as they possibly can is going to be really important, because to be completely honest, in this collection so far, the way these titles feel in total, maybe once we get the hold of the other ones, it's going to be very important to see how they feel. But yeah, dude, like this is the best these games have ever felt since the original Dreamcast / the arcade versions, which is kind of an amazing feat, because that when it comes to ports of games / emulation of ports and stuff like that, it is not going to be the same thing, and there is going to be compromises made to inputs and feel of the games. And I just couldn't believe how good CVS 2 felt. It really brought me back to that MVC 2 preview event and, you know, realizing, wow, this actually feels wonderful. Like, whoa. And yeah, the Capcom Fighting Collection 2, as well as the MVC Collection, while it's not out yet, and hopefully there will be even more improvements, do kind of show the fact that Capcom really cares to preserve that original arcade / old school console experience, especially through things like input delay and making that as minimal as possible to have it feel as good as it possibly can. Anyway, it's not out yet. We're going to be waiting on this stuff. There's more games to be played in here, which I'll probably come back to at a later date. But at least so far, you know, from the few ones we played, they all ran really good. But because I had the most experience with something like a Capcom versus SNK 2, that one to me felt especially refined because of that experience. And I have good news that it feels wonderful. Anyway, thank you guys a ton. Appreciate Capcom for letting us play this stuff a little bit early. I'm looking forward to playing the other games, and when I do get a chance to do so, I'll be back with another video. If you guys liked it, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. My name is Max, and I'll see you dudes next time.